The ending of this story will amaze you. I advise everyone to listen to it to the end. You ever notice how some basements just feel wrong? Like the air's too still, or like someone's been there just before you walked in. Most people shrug it off, but I think basements know something we don't. I don't mean they're haunted. Just heavy, like they hold memories. Anyway, that's how this story starts. 4 of us, me, Jason, Sarah, and Kyle, crowded around the beat-up card table in Kyle's basement. It wasn't a bad place. His parents had spruced it up years ago with a couple of saggy couches, shelves of dusty board games, and even an old mini-fridge humming in the corner. It was the kind of spot teenagers claimed as their own, like a half-finished clubhouse. That night was supposed to be ordinary. Kyle had told us he found something cool at the thrift shop uptown, a new board game. He dropped it on the table with a dramatic thud and slid into his seat like he'd just handed us the Ark of the Covenant. This, he said, is what we're playing tonight. The box wasn't new. It was old, yellowed edges, a few dark smudges. It didn't have a title or flashy cover art like most games. Just plain cardboard and a faded sticker on the top corner with one word, *convergent star. Sarah squinted at it. Looks ancient. You sure it's not cursed? Kyle snorted, brushing his shaggy hair back. Relax, it's just a game. And it was $2. Bargain. Jason, ever the instigator, smirked. Let's open it. Maybe there's treasure inside. Kyle flipped open the lid. Now, I don't know what I expected, but the inside was weird, like someone had really cared about this game once. There were thick cards with red-inked writing, a metal spinner that clicked when it turned, and small wooden pieces shaped like people. Not figures or pawns, just blocks with vague indentations, like they were meant to suggest people instead of look like them. Sarah picked one up and frowned. Why does this look like a coffin? Kyle rolled his eyes. Dude. It's just a block. He was right, of course. It was just a block. But when she set it down, it made this tiny sound, like the wood was hollow. And there it was again, that feeling. Like something had shifted in the room. Rules? Jason asked, thumbing through the cards. Kyle held up a crinkled paper tucked beneath the pieces. Got M. Looks simple enough. It's fast-paced. Team play. And, oh, check this out, players must complete the round. Must, I echoed. Jason chuckled, leaning back. Sounds ominous. What happens if we don't? Kyle grinned. Guess we'll find out. Let's play. It started innocent enough. The game was like a mix of Pictionary and charades. The spinner dictated what you'd do, draw, act, guess, or answer, and the cards gave cryptic little prompts like draw something that doesn't belong. Act out something only you can see. Answer honestly, what do you hear when you're alone? Creepy. Sure. But also kind of fun. Fast, like Kyle said. Rounds ticked by, and we were laughing, mocking each other's bad drawings and Sarah's exaggerated acting. Jason nailed his first 3 rounds in a row and kept flexing like a pro athlete. Kyle gave him grief for being too competitive. But after a while, something about the prompt started to change. Your turn, Kyle said, sliding the spinner to me. I flicked it, the metal clicking against the wood. It landed on draw. He handed me a card, and I read it out loud. Draw the last thing you remember before falling asleep. The room went quiet. Jason snickered. Oh, nightmare time. I didn't say anything. I just picked up a pencil and started sketching. It wasn't much, just a simple doorway, cracked open a sliver. Light spilled from the gap. I shaded in 2 feet standing just beyond it. When I finished, I heard Sarah whisper, "Why does that look so real?" I didn't know. It just did. Jason leaned over to inspect it. "What is that? A guy standing outside your door?" "Maybe," I muttered. "I don't remember." Kyle grabbed the card. "You have to guess now, remember?" "Sarah." Sarah was quiet. She didn't guess right away, just stared at my drawing. I don't know what she was seeing, but something about her expression bothered me. Finally, she whispered, "Someone waiting." The spinner clicked. A tiny, metallic ding. Kyle turned pale. "That's correct." We all looked at each other. Sarah forced a laugh. "I mean, it's a game, right?" But from that point on, the prompts got stranger. Sarah's next card told her to act out the last thing she thought she saw in the dark. She didn't want to do it, but Kyle egged her on. She stood in the middle of the room and turned toward the basement stairs. She didn't move for almost a full minute, just stood there with her head tilted slightly, like she was listening. I glanced at Jason, who mouthed, "What's she doing?" Finally, Sarah broke character. "This game's stupid. My turn's over." The spinner dinged. Kyle looked at the card again and frowned. You're not supposed to stop mid-round. It says." "I don't care," Sarah shot back. "It's a stupid thrift store game." I could tell Kyle was about to argue, but something stopped him. Maybe it was Sarah's face, how serious she looked. Or maybe it was the fact that we all felt it. Something had shifted. The basement door, locked from the inside, creaked open, inch by inch. Jason spun around. "Did you hear that?" Sarah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I locked that door." For a long second, nobody moved. It was stupid, really, just a basement door creaking open. But when you're already uneasy, the smallest thing can hit like a punch in the chest. Asterisk, "Did you hear that?" Asterisk, Jason asked again, his voice sharper this time. Kyle forced a laugh. "Relax, man. It's probably just. I don't know. The wind?" Sarah shot him a look. "We're in the basement, Kyle." Kyle shrugged, though his grin faltered. "All right, fine. Jason, go close it. You're the one freaking out." Jason didn't argue. He was the type to act tough even when he was clearly unnerved. He stood, crossed the room, and pushed the door shut. The lock clicked back into place, louder than it should have been. When he turned to come back, though, he hesitated on the bottom step. "What?" I asked. He stared at the door for a moment longer, then shook his head and muttered, "Nothing." He sat back down, quieter than before. The tension lingered like stale air. The game sat in the middle of the table, that hollow wooden spinner gleaming faintly under the cheap basement light. Nobody said it out loud, but none of us wanted to keep playing. It was Sarah who finally spoke up. "So, are we done?" Kyle bristled. "Done? We've barely started." Jason scoffed. "Dude, that thing's weird. I'm with Sarah, let's just play something else." Kyle grabbed the rule sheet and waved it. "Guys, look, it's just a game. We don't have to be babies about it." He glanced down at the paper and read aloud. Asterisk, "Players must complete the round, asterisk, it literally says that. We can't quit in the middle, or we lose." Asterisk, "Lose what?" Asterisk, I asked. Kyle smirked. "Our pride." Sarah didn't laugh. "Kyle, I'm serious. I don't." Before she could finish, the spinner clicked. We all froze. None of us had touched it, but the thing was spinning on its own, slowly, like someone had just given it a gentle flick. We watched as it clicked around in lazy circles, wood against metal, until finally it stopped. It pointed at ACT. We all stared at each other. Who spun it? Sarah demanded. Jason held up his hands. Not me. Kyle looked genuinely confused. I didn't. Before he could finish, the spinner clicked again, just once, like a warning. I can't describe how unnatural it felt, how deliberate. Kyle glanced down at the top card and went pale. What does it say? I asked. He swallowed hard and read. Asterisk, act out what's standing behind you. Asterisk. The words hit like ice water down my spine. None of us spoke. Kyle's face was pale, and for the first time, he looked scared. It's just a game, Jason said quietly, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. Kyle set the card down like it might burn him. Fine. Let's end the round. I'm not doing it. Sarah shot up from her seat. Good. Let's just get out of here. Forget the stupid game. The basement light flickered. We all froze. The fluorescent hum buzzed louder for a second, then cut out completely. Darkness. Someone swore under their breath. I'm not even sure who, maybe it was me. Phone lights, Jason said. I heard him fumbling in the dark. Turn on your phones. The basement lit up with shaky beams of light as we all flipped on our screens. The shadows leaned long and thin against the walls. Sarah's breathing was loud and ragged. Where's the breaker? She whispered. Kyle swallowed. Back corner. Go flip it, then. Kyle's beam of light shook as he aimed it toward the far wall. Nope, Jason said firmly. We're not splitting up. We go together. I'll admit it, I didn't want to go. There was something about that darkness that felt alive, like it was listening. But staying put wasn't any better. The four of us moved as a pack, hugging the walls as we crept toward the back corner where the breaker box hung. Is this normal for your basement? I whispered to Kyle. He shook his head, face pale in the glow of his phone. Never happened before. When we reached the breaker, Kyle opened the box with a rusty screech. The switches looked fine, none of them were flipped. That doesn't make sense, Jason muttered. Kyle reached out to reset the main switch anyway. When he did, the basement lights roared back to life with a sudden, buzzing hum. For a second, I felt relief. Then I noticed Jason wasn't moving. Jason? I asked. He was staring back toward the table. Slowly, I turned my head to see what he was looking at. The game. The spinner was moving again, slow, deliberate turns, like something was breathing on it. None of us had touched it. The light hit the cards in a weird way, and for a second, I thought I saw a faint smudge where Sarah had set down her wooden piece earlier. A handprint. Okay, Kyle muttered. Game's over. Let's pack this up. He stepped forward and reached for the box. The second his fingers touched the edge, every phone light blinked out at once. Darkness. Someone screamed, I think it was Sarah. Then the lights flickered back on, and for half a second, I swear I saw it. Something standing at the bottom of the basement stairs. Not a person. Just, tall, too tall, like its head was nearly brushing the ceiling. It was gone in an instant, but the image burned into my brain, a shape, pale and blurred, almost human but wrong. Kyle knocked the game box off the table. The spinner fell to the floor and shattered, pieces scattering like teeth. We're leaving, he said, voice shaking. Now. None of us argued. We ran for the stairs, stumbling over each other in our rush to get out. Kyle's basement door was still locked, but this time, he didn't hesitate. He twisted the deadbolt so hard I thought it would snap, yanked the door open, and we spilled into the hallway like rats escaping a flood. We didn't stop until we were outside, standing on Kyle's front lawn. The air felt clean out there, safe. Jason bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. What the hell was that? Kyle didn't answer. None of us did. The basement lights were still on, glowing faintly through the small window near the ground. For a second, I thought I saw movement, like someone walking just beyond the glass. Sarah grabbed my arm. Do you think it followed us? We didn't talk much after that. Not at first. We just stood there on Kyle's lawn, trying to wrap our heads around what had just happened. The night air was cold, sharp against my skin, but I didn't care. I was just glad to be out of that basement. Jason broke the silence first. What's wrong with your house, man? Kyle looked pale, his eyes darting between us and the glow of the basement window. Nothing's wrong with my house. It's that stupid game. Sarah hugged herself, rubbing her arms like she couldn't get warm. I told you we shouldn't have played. It's cursed or haunted or something. Games can't be haunted, Jason said, though he didn't sound sure of himself. I stayed quiet. I didn't believe in curses, but what happened in that basement wasn't normal. That spinner, the lights, it felt like something had noticed us, like we'd poked our heads into a place we didn't belong. After a minute, Kyle sighed. Look, maybe we're overreacting. I'll toss the game in the trash. Problem solved. Jason straightened, frowning. No, wait, what about the rule? What rule? I asked. Jason looked at Kyle. You said it earlier. Players must complete the round. Kyle rolled his eyes, but he wouldn't quite look at us. Dude, it's just a stupid line in the rules. It doesn't mean anything. Are you sure? Sarah shot back, her voice trembling. Because it sure as hell felt like it meant something back there. The group fell silent. We didn't want to admit it, but the same thought was running through all of our heads. What if leaving the game unfinished was a mistake? I glanced back at the basement window again. It was still glowing, but the movement I'd thought I'd seen earlier was gone. Just my imagination, I told myself. Kyle shoved his hands in his pockets. Look, nothing's gonna happen. You're all being paranoid. Just go home, okay? You're keeping the game? Jason asked. Don't worry about it, Kyle snapped. I said I'll toss it. Now go home. It wasn't like Kyle to get short with us. That's when I realized how scared he was, too. He didn't want to admit it, but whatever happened down there had rattled him just as much as it had the rest of us. So we left. We didn't argue. We just left. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of what happened, the spinner clicking on its own, the shadow by the stairs, that thing that was too tall to be human. I kept telling myself it was just a trick of the light, a weird coincidence. But it didn't help. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. I jolted upright, my heart pounding. It was a text from Sarah. Did you hear from Kyle? I'm worried. I frowned and replied. No. Why? A few seconds later, she texted back. I think he still has the game. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell her to calm down, that it was just a stupid old board game. But another part of me, the part that couldn't stop thinking about the basement, knew that wasn't true. Before I could type a reply, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a group text from Kyle. Guys, I need you to come back. Now. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. Jason replied first. What? It's 2 a.m., man. Are you okay? Kyle's response came almost immediately. Please. Something's wrong. I can't stop it. That's all it took. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed my keys, threw on my shoes, and bolted for the car. When I pulled up to Kyle's house, Jason and Sarah were already there, standing in the driveway. Sarah's face was pale in the glow of her phone screen, and Jason looked rattled, chewing nervously on the edge of his thumb. "Did he answer you?" I asked, slamming my car door. Jason shook his head. "Nothing since the last text. I tried calling, but he's not picking up." Sarah pointed at the house. "The basement light's still on." We all looked. She was right, the faint glow from the small window near the ground was still there, flickering slightly. Jason swallowed hard. "You think he went back down there?" "I don't know," I said. "But we can't leave him." No one wanted to say it, but we were all thinking the same thing. Whatever this is, Kyle brought it on himself. We crept toward the front door, the porch creaking under our weight. The house was eerily quiet. No sounds from inside, no TV, no voices. Just silence. Sarah tried the door. It was unlocked. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered. Jason ignored her. "Kyle," he called softly, stepping inside. The house felt colder than it should have. I followed Jason, Sarah close behind me, and we made our way to the basement door. It was shut, but light leaked out from the gap beneath it. Jason hesitated with his hand on the knob. "If something's wrong, we grab Kyle and get out." "Agreed?" We nodded. Jason turned the handle. The basement looked exactly like it had before, the same beat-up couches, the same card table. Only now, the game was set up again, like we'd never left. The box sat open, the wooden pieces arranged neatly around the board. And Kyle was sitting in his chair, completely still. "Kyle?" I said softly. He didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the spinner, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "Dude," Jason said, stepping closer. "What are you doing?" Kyle didn't move. That's when I noticed something. The spinner was turning, slowly, like it was being wound up by invisible fingers. It clicked softly against the wood, 1, 2, 3 times. "Kyle," I whispered. "What did you do?" His voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. "I tried to stop. I tried." The spinner slowed to a stop, pointing at answer. A card lay in front of Kyle. He lifted it with shaking hands and read it aloud. Asterisk, what happens when you break the rules? Asterisk. The basement lights flickered. And Kyle started to cry. Kyle's sobs filled the basement, low and shuddering like something had finally broken inside him. None of us spoke. I didn't know how to speak. The card sat trembling in his hands, the words hanging in the air like a weight. Asterisk, what happens when you break the rules? Asterisk. Jason took a step forward. "Kyle, we need to get out of here, man. Right now." Kyle shook his head violently. "You don't get it. I can't leave. I tried. It won't let me." "What are you talking about?" Sarah's voice was high-pitched, panicked. Kyle pointed at the table. "The game. It keeps resetting. I put it away, I threw it in the trash. But when I came back down here, it was waiting for me. Set up. Like this." I stared at the wooden blocks, the spinner, the cards. They looked exactly like they had before. Identical. Almost too identical, like the pieces hadn't moved since the last round. Jason ran a hand through his hair. "This is insane. It's just a board game, man." Kyle's head snapped up, and he looked at Jason with eyes that didn't seem to belong to him anymore. "Then play. Sit down and play, Jason. See if it lets you leave." That's when I noticed something else. Kyle's chair was pulled slightly away from the table, but the rest of the chairs were perfectly aligned. Waiting. Jason turned to me, his voice low. "We need to get him out of here." Kyle's voice cracked. "If we don't finish, it'll..." The spinner moved. Nobody touched it. It spun slowly, clicking over the wood, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. One by one, we all turned to watch it, as if we couldn't help ourselves. It slowed, then stopped. Draw. The card pile sat untouched in the center of the table. Slowly, as if in a trance, Kyle reached for the top card. His hands were shaking. "Kyle, don't," Sarah whispered. But he didn't listen. He turned the card over and stared at it. For a moment, he just froze. Then, in a voice so flat it didn't sound like him anymore, he read. Asterisk, draw who's watching you. Asterisk. A chill crawled up my spine, sharp and cold. Kyle's pencil was already in his hand, like he couldn't stop himself. He leaned forward, his movements jerky and mechanical, and started to draw. I didn't want to look. But I did. At first, it was just lines. Sloppy, rough, like he didn't care how the picture looked. Then shapes began to emerge, a pair of eyes, too large and too round. A face that was almost human but stretched, warped. The pencil scratched frantically against the paper as Kyle filled in the background. I realized what he was drawing. The basement stairs. The same place where I'd seen that thing. Kyle dropped the pencil and slumped back in his chair. His drawing sat in front of him, dark and smudged. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sarah whispered. Why does it look like it's moving? I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. At first, I thought Sarah was losing it. But then I saw what she meant. The drawing shifted. It was subtle, like a trick of the eyes, but the face seemed closer now, the dark circles of its eyes larger. Jason backed up. We're done. We're done. The basement lights flickered again. No, Kyle said, his voice hollow. We can't stop. Jason ignored him. Screw this. He grabbed the game box, knocking pieces everywhere, and shoved it shut. The spinner clattered to the floor, the cards scattering like leaves. The lights went out. The basement was pitch black. Someone screamed, Sarah, maybe, or Kyle, but the sound cut off like a breath caught in a throat. Phone lights. Jason shouted, but his voice sounded far away, like the room had grown larger. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. I hit the flashlight, and a shaky beam of light spilled out into the dark. I swept it toward the others. Kyle was gone. Jason stood frozen near the table, staring at the spot where Kyle had been sitting. Sarah clutched the back of her chair, her face pale, her phone shaking in her hand. Where's Kyle? I breathed. Jason swallowed hard. He was right there. He didn't move. Guys? Sarah's voice wavered. She was looking past us, toward the basement stairs. We turned, slowly. My light followed hers. At the top of the basement stairs, the door was open. A figure stood just beyond it, tall, impossibly tall, its head brushing the frame. Its face was hidden in shadow, but its eyes were wide. Watching. Sarah whimpered. Jason grabbed my arm. Asterisk go, asterisk. We bolted. Jason shoved me toward the stairs, and I didn't look back. I didn't want to see it. I heard Sarah running behind me, gasping for breath as we scrambled up the steps. The figure didn't move. It just watched. We hit the top of the stairs and Jason slammed the door shut behind us. I didn't stop running until we were outside, my lungs burning, my legs ready to give out. We collapsed on the front lawn again, staring back at the house like it might come alive. Sarah doubled over, sobbing. Jason stared at the front door, his face pale. Kyle's still in there. I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. What was that thing? Jason didn't answer. The basement window glowed faintly, the light flickering, almost like the game was still being played. I swore I saw a shape, Kyle's shape, sitting at the table again. Sarah wiped her face, her voice shaking. We have to get help. We have to call someone. Jason nodded. The cops, maybe. Or. He stopped. His phone buzzed. We all froze. Slowly, Jason pulled it from his pocket and looked at the screen. A text. From Kyle. You left. You broke the rules. Jason's hands trembled. Another text came through. It's your turn. The spinner's faint clicking echoed in my head. Jason dropped his phone like it had burned him. It hit the grass with a dull thud, the screen still glowing faintly. What does that mean? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My eyes were glued to the basement window. The light flickered faintly, Kyle's shape still hunched at the table, unmoving. Playing. Jason swallowed hard and picked up his phone, his hands shaking. I'm calling the cops. But before he could unlock it, another text buzzed onto his screen. This time, the sound felt wrong, like the vibration had rattled through my chest. We all looked down. You came back. Good. Jason cursed under his breath and turned off his phone, his face pale. Sarah grabbed my arm. We can't go back down there. We can't. But I felt it already. That pull. That weight. It was as if the game, the house, was reaching out, pressing us to finish what we started. I turned to Jason and Sarah, the words coming out of my mouth before I'd even decided to say them. We don't have a choice. Inside, Kyle's house was deathly quiet. The air was heavy, thick, like it had been sitting there for years. None of us wanted to move, but we did, slow, measured steps toward the basement door. It was still ajar. Light spilled through the crack. The basement was waiting. Jason turned to me, his voice low. We grab Kyle and run. No games. No talking. We run. I nodded, but I wasn't sure if that was even possible anymore. I placed my hand on the door, the wood warmed to the touch. Slowly, I pushed it open. We descended the stairs, every step creaking like a warning. And there he was. Kyle sat at the table, his head tilted down, his back to us. The game was set up again, pieces in place, cards stacked neatly, spinner gleaming faintly under the buzzing basement light. Kyle. Jason whispered. No response. Sarah swallowed hard. Kyle, please. Slowly, Jason crept closer, reaching out a hand toward Kyle's shoulder. Hey, man, we're here too. Kyle's head jerked up. I gasped. His face, God, his face, was wrong. His skin looked too pale, like stretched wax, his lips cracked and dry. His eyes were empty, staring but not seeing. It was still Kyle, but it wasn't. And his mouth moved. His voice came out hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in weeks. Sit. Down. Jason froze. What? Sit down, Kyle snarled, his voice splitting like it belonged to two people at once. Jason stumbled back, his face white. The basement door slammed shut behind us. The lights buzzed louder. I turned to Sarah, ready to tell her to run, but she was already gone. Her chair was pulled out, and she was sitting at the table, staring blankly at the game. She didn't look at me or Jason. Her fingers twitched as she reached for a card. Sarah! I shouted. She didn't respond. The spinner clicked. Jason turned to me, his voice cracking. We need to leave now. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like concrete. Something was pressing down on us, on me, a weight, a presence. The room felt alive, pulsing. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, coming from the far end of the basement where the light didn't reach. I didn't want to look. I knew what was there. I could feel it. But my head turned anyway. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs stretched like they didn't belong on a human body. Its skin was paper pale, almost translucent, like it was rotting from the inside. Its head tilted unnaturally, its neck making a sound like grinding stone. But it wasn't its body that froze me in place. It was the face. It was mine. A hollow, distorted version of my face, stretched and staring, with two wide eyes and a slack mouth that looked ready to whisper things I didn't want to hear. Jason screamed. I heard him run, sprinting toward the basement stairs, his shoes pounding against the concrete. But I couldn't move. The thing kept walking toward me, its bare feet scraping across the floor. I turned back to the table. Kyle was still staring at the board. Sarah had pulled a card and was holding it up in front of her face, mumbling words I couldn't hear. Her eyes were blank, glassy. And then the spinner clicked. It moved on its own, faster and faster until it stopped. Act. The lights flickered wildly. I felt something cold behind me, breath against my neck, a clawing presence at my back. The thing whispered in my ear. Your turn. I looked down at my hands. A card had appeared between my fingers. I don't know when I picked it up, or how. My chest felt tight as I turned it over. Asterisk, act out how you'll look when you're dead. Asterisk. No, I whispered. The lights cut out. I couldn't see. The darkness pressed in, suffocating, alive. I felt myself stand, though I didn't want to. My arms moved, my fingers twitching like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. I couldn't stop. And then I saw. The light flared back on for a split second, like a camera flash. Jason was on the floor, sprawled unnaturally, his neck bent at the wrong angle. Sarah sat slumped in her chair, staring blankly at nothing, blood dripping from her nose. And Kyle. Kyle was smiling. Not at me. Not at the game. At something else, something that filled the space between us, something I couldn't see but could feel scraping at the edges of my mind. The light flickered again, and my own reflection stared back at me from the basement window. Only it wasn't my reflection. It smiled. And I knew, deep down, that we hadn't found the game. It had found us.